working as a waitress at a millionaire's wedding. The woman was tormented upon realizing that the groom was her husband, who died 5 years ago. She approached, and Ashley Miller wiped her hands on her apron, staring out the window of the diner as rain tapped gently against the glass. The late afternoon crowd was thinning, leaving her a brief moment to catch her breath. For most people, this might have been just another ordinary day, but for Ashley, every shift felt like an uphill battle. She glanced at the clock above the register. Another 3 hours to go before she could head home to Ruby, her 5-year-old daughter. The thought of Ruby brought a faint smile to her face. Her daughter was her whole world, a bright light in a life that had often felt consumed by darkness. "Hey, Ashley, table 3's waiting on their coffee," barked Margaret, the diner's owner, snapping her back to reality. "On it," Ashley replied, forcing a smile as she grabbed the coffee pot. She moved swiftly, her well-practiced steps navigating the narrow aisles of the diner as she poured coffee for the elderly couple at table 3. Ashley exchanged polite pleasantries, but her mind was elsewhere. Memories of Luke, her late husband, crept into her thoughts. It had been 5 years since the accident, but the ache of losing him hadn't faded. The official story was that his body had been lost at sea after his boat capsized during a storm. She had been 3 months pregnant with Ruby at the time, and the shock of his sudden disappearance had left her reeling. What made it worse was the uncertainty. No body had ever been found, no closure, just an empty space where her husband and her peace of mind used to be. Ashley shook off the thoughts as she returned to the counter. Dwelling on the past wouldn't pay the bills. The bell above the diner door jingled, and a man in a soaked raincoat stepped inside. He nodded at Ashley as he took a seat by the window, pulling out a book to read. She refilled the coffee pot and headed over to him. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice warm but tired. "Please?" the man replied with a polite smile. As she poured, Ashley noticed the title of the book starting over, Stories of Reinvention. The irony wasn't lost on her. Back behind the counter, Margaret slid a slip of paper toward her. "Got a call from a catering agency. They're short-staffed for an event tonight at Rosewood Country Club. Big wedding? I told them you might be interested." Ashley's eyebrows shot up. "Rosewood, isn't that where all the rich people hang out?" Margaret chuckled. "Exactly. They're paying double for the night. You could use the cash, right?" Ashley hesitated. She hated the idea of leaving Ruby with a neighbor again, but the extra money could help cover the heating bill this month. "Okay, I'll do it," she said, stuffing the slip of paper into her pocket. Later that evening, Ashley stood in front of her mirror, brushing a few stray strands of hair into her tight bun. She adjusted the black uniform she had borrowed from Margaret. It was a little snug, but it would do. Ruby sat on the bed behind her, playing with a stuffed bunny. "Where are you going, Mommy?" Ruby asked, her big brown eyes watching her intently. "Just a work thing, sweetheart. I'll be back after you're asleep." Ruby frowned. "I don't like when you leave." Ashley knelt down, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "I know, baby, but this will help us, I promise. And Miss Clara will be here if you need anything." "Okay." Ruby nodded reluctantly. Ashley kissed her forehead before grabbing her coat and heading out into the chilly night. The grandeur of the Rosewood Country Club took Ashley's breath away. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the air was filled with the hum of lively chatter and the soft strains of classical music. She slipped into the staff area, where a harried catering manager handed her a tray of champagne flutes. "You'll be circulating the ballroom. Keep the glasses full. And don't drop anything," he instructed curtly. Ashley stepped into the ballroom, feeling out of place among the opulence. She moved through the crowd, balancing the tray and avoiding eye contact with the impeccably dressed guests. As she approached the center of the room, a wave of murmurs caught her attention. People were turning toward the front of the ballroom where the wedding ceremony was about to begin. Ashley froze, her eyes locked on the groom standing at the altar. The tray in her hands trembled. It was Luke. He looked older, more polished, but there was no mistaking him. The man who was supposed to be dead stood there, holding the hand of a stunning woman in a designer wedding gown. Ashley's heart pounded as she stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a waiter. She clutched the edge of a nearby table, struggling to catch her breath. Luke's gaze flickered over the crowd and landed on her. For a moment, their eyes met. He froze but quickly looked away, as if she were a stranger. Ashley's tray clattered to the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. She turned and ran, tears streaming down her face as she fled the scene. Ashley burst through the gilded doors of the Rosewood Country Club, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. She gasped for breath, her chest heaving as tears blurred her vision. Her mind raced, replaying the image of Luke standing at the altar, hand in hand with another woman. How was this possible? He was supposed to be dead. She stumbled toward a bench near the valet station and collapsed onto it. Her trembling hands gripped the edges of the bench as she struggled to make sense of what she had just seen. Every emotion she had buried over the past 5 years came rushing back in a torrent. Grief, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. "Ma'am, are you all right?" A soft voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Ashley looked up to see a man standing a few feet away. He was tall, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends and kind blue eyes. His suit was well-fitted but understated, a sharp contrast to the ostentatious attire of most of the guests inside. I'm fine," she stammered, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "You don't look fine," he said gently, stepping closer. "Did something happen inside?" Ashley hesitated. She didn't know this man, but there was something about his calm demeanor that put her at ease. "It's nothing," she said, her voice shaky. I need to get home." The man glanced at the valet station, where a line of luxury cars gleamed under the lights. "Do you have a ride? Or should I call someone for you?" Ashley shook her head. "I took the bus." The man frowned, his concern deepening. "At this hour, that's not safe." Before she could protest, he gestured toward the parking lot. "Let me give you a ride. It's the least I can do." Ashley hesitated, her instincts warning her against accepting help from a stranger. But the thought of taking the bus, especially in her current state, was too much to bear. "All right," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's car was modest, a practical sedan that contrasted sharply with the parade of sports cars and limousines in the lot. He opened the passenger door for her and she slid into the seat, her hands still trembling slightly. "I'm Zachary, by the way," he said as he started the engine. "Ashley," she replied, her voice subdued. The drive was quiet at first, the hum of the engine and the occasional swish of windshield wipers filling the silence. Zachary didn't press her for details, instead letting her sit in her thoughts. "You work here?" he asked after a while, his tone casual. "Not really," Ashley said. "I was just helping out for the night. A catering job." "Rough crowd," Zachary said with a small smile. "I've been to a few of these events. They can be overwhelming." Ashley managed a faint smile in return, but the weight in her chest remained. When they reached her modest apartment building in Providence, Zachary pulled up to the curb and turned to her. "Here we are." "Thank you," Ashley said, her voice still shaky. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "I appreciate it, really." Zachary nodded. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Ashley opened the door and stepped out, glancing back briefly before heading inside. The next morning, Ashley sat at the small kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee as Ruby ate her cereal. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating the cheerful drawings Ruby had taped to the fridge. "Did you have a good night with Miss Clara?" Ashley asked, forcing a smile. Ruby nodded, her mouth full of cereal. "We played dress-up, and she let me stay up late to watch cartoons." Ashley chuckled softly, though her thoughts were still elsewhere. She hadn't slept much, her mind replaying the events of the night before over and over again. Who was the woman Luke was marrying? Why had he faked his death? And why had he acted as though he didn't even know her? Her phone buzzed on the counter, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Margaret at the diner. "Extra shift available today if you want it." Ashley sighed. The distraction of work would be welcome, but she wasn't sure she had the energy to face another day of smiling at customers. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door, frowning. Ashley went to answer it. Standing on the other side was Zachary, holding a tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a small paper bag. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "I figured you might need this after last night." Ashley blinked in surprise. "How did you—" "You mentioned the street name when I dropped you off," Zachary said, his tone apologetic. "I hope this isn't overstepping." "No, it's fine," Ashley said, stepping aside to let him in. Ruby peeked around the corner, her eyes wide with curiosity. "And who's this little one?" Zachary asked, crouching slightly to meet Ruby's gaze. "This is Ruby," Ashley said, her voice softening. "Nice to meet you, Ruby," Zachary said warmly. He held out the paper bag. "I brought some muffins. I hope you like blueberry." Ruby grinned, her shyness melting away. "I love blueberry." As Ruby dug into the bag, Ashley looked at Zachary, her expression a mix of gratitude and caution. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Zachary shrugged. "You looked like you could use a friend." For the first time in a long time, Ashley felt a flicker of hope. Later that afternoon, Ashley stood at the sink, scrubbing the last of Ruby's breakfast dishes. She glanced at the clock. Ruby was napping in the small bedroom they shared, her stuffed bunny tucked under one arm. Ashley dried her hands and sat at the kitchen table, her thoughts once again circling back to the events at the Rosewood Country Club. Luke. The name itself felt heavy, stirring emotions she had worked so hard to bury, before she could spiral too deeply into her thoughts. There was another knock at the door. Frowning, Ashley hesitated. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, Zachary was standing there again, this time holding a small potted plant with bright yellow flowers. "I figured I'd replace the coffee with something less caffeine-dependent," he said, smiling. Ashley stared at him for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Finally, she stepped aside to let him in. "You didn't have to do that," she said as she closed the door behind him. "I know," Zachary replied, setting the plant on the table. "But I wanted to. How are you feeling today?" Ashley sat down, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "Better, I guess. It's just a lot." Zachary nodded, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "I'm not going to push, but if you ever feel like talking about it, I'm a good listener." Ashley studied him, trying to gauge his intentions. There was something disarming about his presence, a calm steadiness that made her want to trust him. "It's complicated," she said after a moment. "Life usually is," Zachary said, leaning back slightly in his chair. "But sometimes, talking it out helps, even if it's just a little." Ashley hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I saw someone last night, someone I thought I'd never see again." Zachary didn't interrupt, his expression encouraging her to continue. "My husband," she said finally. He died 5 years ago at least." "That's what I thought, but last night, I saw him at that wedding. He was the groom." Zachary's brows furrowed slightly, but he kept his tone measured. "That's a lot to process. Are you sure it was him?" "It was him," Ashley said, her voice firm despite the tremble in her hands. "He looked right at me, but he acted like I was a stranger." Zachary leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been for you." Ashley felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't know what to do. Part of me wants answers, but another part of me wants to forget I ever saw him. Ruby doesn't even know him. She's never had to feel that loss the way I did." Zachary nodded slowly. "Sometimes the past has a way of coming back when we least expect it, but whatever happens, you don't have to face it alone." His words lingered in the air, wrapping around her like a lifeline. For the first time in a long time, Ashley felt a small flicker of relief. Like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. Over the next few weeks, Zachary became a regular presence in Ashley and Ruby's lives. He would stop by with groceries or small gifts for Ruby, who had taken a quick liking to him. They spent evenings together, sharing simple meals and stories about their lives. Ashley learned that Zachary had grown up in a small town in Maine and had moved to Providence a few years ago for work. He was vague about the details of his job, describing it only as a little bit of everything. But his easygoing nature and genuine interest in her and Ruby made it easy to overlook his secrecy. Ruby, meanwhile, had fully embraced Zachary as part of their little family. She often insisted he help her with puzzles or join in her tea parties, much to his amusement. One evening, as Zachary helped Ruby put away her toys, Ashley watched them from the kitchen, a warm feeling blossoming in her chest. It had been so long since she had seen Ruby this happy, and the sight of her daughter laughing so freely filled her with a quiet gratitude. "All right, Miss Ruby," Zachary said, scooping her up and spinning her around. "Time for bed." Ruby giggled, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "You'll stay for dinner tomorrow, right?" Zachary glanced at Ashley, who nodded with a smile. "Of course," he said, setting Ruby down gently. Later that night, after Ruby had fallen asleep, Ashley and Zachary sat on the couch, a comfortable silence between them. "You're good with her," Ashley said softly, breaking the quiet. Zachary smiled. "She's a great kid. You've done an amazing job raising her." Ashley looked down at her hands, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I try. It hasn't been easy, but she's worth it." Zachary's expression grew serious. "I mean it, Ashley. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Ashley felt her throat tighten. She had spent so long fighting to keep her head above water that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone in her corner. "Thank you," she said quietly. As the evening stretched on, Ashley realized that, for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the absence of problems. Those still lingered at the edges of her mind, but the presence of someone who made her believe that she didn't have to face them alone. Ashley woke up to the soft sound of Ruby humming a tune in the living room. The sun streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow over their modest apartment. For a fleeting moment, everything felt normal, but as Ashley's mind cleared, the memory of Luke at the altar came rushing back, heavy and impossible to ignore. She sat up in bed, rubbing her temples. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions. Seeing Luke again had thrown her life into disarray, but Zachary's steady presence had been a welcome comfort. Ashley walked into the living room to find Ruby seated on the floor, meticulously arranging her stuffed animals for a tea party. "Good morning, sweetheart," Ashley said, leaning down to kiss Ruby's head. "Morning, Mommy. Look, mister, Bunny has a bow tie today." Ruby beamed, holding up her favorite stuffed rabbit. Ashley smiled, the simple joy in Ruby's voice momentarily lifting the weight on her chest. "Very fancy. Are you ready for breakfast?" Ruby nodded enthusiastically, and Ashley headed to the kitchen to prepare a quick meal. As she cooked, her thoughts wandered back to Luke. She couldn't shake the image of him turning away from her at the wedding, his face unreadable. How could he pretend she didn't exist? The sound of her phone buzzing on the counter snapped her out of her reverie. She wiped her hands on a towel and picked it up. It was a text from Zachary. "Coffee later, I'll bring the muffins." Ashley smiled despite herself. She typed back a quick response. "Sounds good. Ruby would never forgive you if you forgot the muffins." Later that afternoon, Zachary arrived with a bag of muffins and his usual easygoing demeanor. Ruby greeted him with a hug, then promptly claimed her favorite blueberry muffin. As they sat at the kitchen table, Zachary studied Ashley's face. "You look like you didn't sleep much last night," he said gently. Ashley sighed. "It's been hard. I can't stop thinking about him." Zachary didn't need to ask who she meant. He leaned back in his chair, giving her space to continue. "It's not just that he's alive," Ashley said, her voice trembling. "It's that he acted like I didn't even exist, like the life we had together meant nothing." "Have you thought about confronting him?" Zachary asked. Ashley shook her head quickly. "No. What would I even say? And what if I don't like the answers?" Zachary leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better than living in the dark. You deserve answers, Ashley." Ashley looked down at her hands, unsure of how to respond that evening, after Zachary had left. Ashley sat on the couch with a box of old photographs. Ruby was asleep in her room, leaving the apartment quiet, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. She picked up a photo of her and Luke from their wedding day. They looked so young, so full of hope. Ashley traced her fingers over his face, a lump forming in her throat. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered to the empty room. The knock at the door startled her. She quickly wiped her eyes and set the photo aside. When she opened the door, she was met with a manila envelope on the ground. There was no sign of who had left it, frowning. Ashley picked it up and closed the door. She opened the envelope cautiously, her breath catching when she saw its contents. Photos of Luke with the woman from the wedding, smiling and holding hands in what appeared to be candid moments. Her heart pounded as she flipped through the photos. Each one felt like a stab to the chest. There was also a typed note inside. "If you want the truth, meet me at Newport Marina tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Ashley stared at the note, her mind racing. Who had sent this? And why? The next day, Ashley couldn't focus on anything. Her thoughts were consumed by the note and the photos. Part of her wanted to ignore it entirely, to pretend she had never seen them, but another part of her, fueled by years of unanswered questions, needed to know the truth. By the time the evening rolled around, she had made her decision. She called Miss Clara to watch Ruby and left the apartment, her heart pounding as she drove to the marina. When she arrived, the docks were quiet, the sound of the water lapping against the boats. The only noise, a single street lamp cast a dim glow over the area. Ashley parked her car and stepped out, clutching the envelope tightly. "Over here," a voice called softly. Ashley turned to see a figure standing near the edge of the dock. As she approached, she realized it was a woman, dressed in dark clothing with a hood pulled over her head. "You're the one who sent this?" Ashley asked, holding up the envelope. The woman nodded. "I thought you deserved to know the truth." Ashley frowned. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated, then pulled back her hood to reveal a familiar face. "I'm Emma," she said. "I worked with Luke at Harrison & Co. There are things you need to know about him, about why he disappeared." Ashley's stomach twisted. She wasn't sure she was ready for what she was about to hear, but she knew there was no turning back now. The marina's air was damp and heavy, and, carrying the faint smell of salt water, Ashley stood frozen, her fingers gripping the manila envelope tightly as Emma's words echoed in her mind. "I worked with Luke," Emma repeated, her expression guarded, "and I can tell you why he disappeared." Ashley's voice faltered as she spoke. "Why are you doing this? Why now?" Emma glanced around nervously, as though expecting someone to appear out of the shadows. "Because I owe it to you. I was part of it. What happened to Luke? I helped him fake his death." The ground seemed to shift beneath Ashley's feet. "You helped him," Emma nodded, her eyes darting toward the water. "It wasn't just him. We were both caught up in something bigger than us. Harrison & Co. isn't just a company. It's a web of corruption, and Luke stumbled into the middle of it. When he realized what he was dealing with, he panicked. He thought disappearing was the only way to save himself. And you," Ashley's mind reeled. "Save me. By abandoning me. By leaving me to raise our daughter alone." Emma's face softened. "I'm not defending what he did. I'm just telling you what he believed at the time. He thought he was protecting you. But things got out of hand." Ashley took a shaky step back, her grip tightening on the envelope. "You should leave. I don't want to hear any more of this." Emma hesitated, but finally nodded. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." As Emma disappeared into the shadows, Ashley stood there for a long moment, her thoughts a chaotic storm. She finally turned and walked back to her car, the envelope clutched tightly against her chest. That night, Ashley sat on her bed, staring at the photos spread out before her. Ruby was asleep in the next room, her soft snores a comforting rhythm in the silence. Ashley couldn't stop replaying Emma's words in her head. Luke had thought he was protecting her. By faking his death, none of it made sense. A knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Her heart leapt into her throat. It was late. Too late for visitors. She tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole, her breath caught. It was Luke. Ashley's hands trembled as she unlocked the door. She opened it just enough to meet his gaze, her voice a shaky whisper. "What are you doing here?" Luke looked disheveled, his usually sharp features softened by exhaustion. "Ashley, I need your help." Anger flared within her, momentarily replacing her shock. "You disappear for 5 years, let me think you're dead. And now you show up asking for help." "I didn't have a choice," Luke said, his voice low and desperate. "Please, Ash, let me explain." Ashley hesitated, torn between slamming the door in his face and letting him in. Finally, she stepped aside. Luke entered, glancing around the small apartment. "This is nice," he said quietly, his tone awkward. "Don't," Ashley snapped, crossing her arms. "Don't pretend like you care, just tell me why you're here." Luke turned to face her, his eyes heavy with guilt. "I know I don't deserve this, but I'm out of options. The people I was running from. They found me. If I don't disappear again, they'll kill me." Ashley stared at him, her anger giving way to disbelief. "What are you talking about? Who are these people?" Luke ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Harrison & Co. They're more than just a company. They've got ties to organized crime. Embezzlement schemes. Things you wouldn't believe. I got in too deep, and when I tried to get out, they came after me. So you thought faking your death was the solution? Ashley asked, her voice rising. You didn't think to tell me, to give me a choice. I wanted to, Luke said, his voice breaking. But I knew they'd come after you and Ruby if they thought you knew anything. I couldn't risk it. Ashley's chest tightened at the mention of Ruby. You don't get to use her as an excuse. Do you have any idea what you put us through? Luke stepped closer, his expression pleading. I know I screwed up, but I'm here now because I don't know where else to go. You're the only person I can trust. Ashley's anger simmered, her emotions a tangled mess. She wanted to scream at him, to make him feel the pain he had caused her, but she also couldn't ignore the fear in his eyes, the same fear she had seen in her own reflection during those first few months after his disappearance. I don't know if I can help you, she said finally. And I don't know if I want to. Luke nodded slowly, as though he had expected her response. I understand, just please think about it. I'll stay out of sight. You won't even know I'm here. Ashley sighed, running a hand through her hair. You can sleep on the couch, but this doesn't mean I've forgiven you. Luke nodded again, his shoulders sagging with relief. Thank you, Ash. I'll make this right. I promise. As she watched him settle onto the couch, Ashley felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She didn't trust him, not fully, but for now, she would let him stay. Her gaze drifted to the closed door of Ruby's room, her daughter blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just outside their fragile bubble of normalcy. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting warm patterns on the living room floor. Ashley stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove, her mind elsewhere. She glanced toward the couch. Where Luke had slept, it was empty now, the blanket folded neatly at the end. She heard the soft shuffle of footsteps and turned to see Luke standing in the kitchen doorway, his face haggard but alert. Morning, he said cautiously, as if testing the waters. Ashley didn't respond immediately. She poured 2 bowls of oatmeal and set them on the table. Ruby's still asleep. Eat quietly. Luke nodded, sitting across from her. The tension between them was palpable, an invisible wall built over 5 years of pain and unanswered questions. As they ate in silence, Ashley finally spoke, her tone sharp. You're going to have to tell me everything. No more half-truths. If you want me to even consider helping you, I need to know what you've been running from. Luke set his spoon down and ran a hand through his hair. It's complicated. Don't. Ashley cut him off, her voice firm. I'm not playing games, Luke. You owe me the truth. Luke sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. All right, you deserve that much. He began to recount the story, his voice low but steady. He told her about the embezzlement scheme at Harrison & Co., how he had discovered irregularities in the company's accounts and had been coerced into participating. The deeper he got, the harder it became to extricate himself. They threatened me, Ash, Luke said, his eyes dark with regret. They made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, they'd come after you and Ruby. So, when I saw an opportunity to disappear, I took it. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. Ashley's hands tightened around her mug. And you thought leaving me to grieve, to raise our daughter alone, was the better option. I didn't know what else to do, Luke admitted. I was scared. I didn't think I had a choice. Ashley shook her head, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. You had a choice, Luke. You could have trusted me. You could have let me help you. Luke's gaze dropped to the table. I know, and I'll regret that decision for the rest of my life. The sound of Ruby's bedroom door opening interrupted their conversation. The little girl appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes and clutching her stuffed bunny. Morning, Mommy, Ruby said sleepily. Then her eyes landed on Luke. She tilted her head. Studying him curiously, Ashley froze, unsure of what to say. Before she could respond, Luke crouched down to Ruby's level, a soft smile on his face. You must be Ruby, he said gently. Ruby looked up at Ashley for confirmation. When Ashley nodded hesitantly, Ruby turned back to Luke. Who are you? Luke hesitated. Glancing at Ashley as if seeking permission, she gave a small nod, her heart pounding. I'm a friend of your mommy's, Luke said finally. Just visiting. Ruby's curiosity faded quickly, and she smiled. Okay, are you staying for breakfast? Luke glanced at Ashley, who sighed. "Go wash your hands. Ruby, I'll make you a bowl." As Ruby skipped to the bathroom, Ashley turned to Luke, her voice low and tense. "Don't get too comfortable. She doesn't need to know who you are yet." Luke nodded, his expression somber. "I understand." Later that day, Ashley stepped outside to take out the trash, the cool air a welcome relief from the tension inside. As she walked back toward the apartment, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against a parked car. "Zachary," she called, surprised. Zachary straightened, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Hey, Ashley, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in." Ashley forced a smile, her heart racing. "Everything's fine. Thanks for stopping by." Zachary frowned slightly, sensing her unease. "You sure? You seem a little off." Ashley hesitated, glancing back toward the apartment. "It's just been a long morning." Zachary studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." As he turned to leave, Ashley felt a pang of guilt. She hated lying to Zachary, but how could she explain the truth? How could she tell him that Luke was alive and hiding in her apartment? Back inside, Luke was pacing the living room, his tension filling the small space. "Who was that?" he asked sharply. "A friend?" Ashley replied, her tone defensive. Luke narrowed his eyes. "You sure about that? He seemed awfully interested in you." Ashley crossed her arms. "Don't start, Luke. You don't get to question my life after everything you've done." Luke raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fair enough. But you should be careful who you trust. Not everyone has your best interests at heart." Ashley let out a bitter laugh. "And you do. Give me a break, Luke." The argument was cut short by the sound of Ruby calling from her room. Ashley shot Luke a warning glare before heading to check on her daughter. As she tucked Ruby in for her afternoon nap, Ashley's mind raced. She was caught between two worlds, one tied to the past and its painful secrets, and the other offering the promise of a better future. But as much as she wanted to move forward, the shadows of the past refused to let her go. The apartment felt smaller than ever. Every time Ashley moved, she was aware of Luke's presence, his pacing, his whispered phone calls when he thought she wasn't paying attention, the tension that radiated from him like static electricity. Ruby, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her, spent most of her day playing or coloring at the kitchen table. Luke avoided her as much as possible, which was a relief to Ashley. She wasn't ready for Ruby to know the truth. Not yet. Ashley sat on the couch, flipping through a stack of unpaid bills, when Luke's voice cut through the quiet. "I can't stay here much longer." She looked up, startled. He stood by the window. Peering out through a small gap in the curtains, his jaw was tense, his eyes scanning the street below. "What are you talking about?" she asked, setting the bills aside. "They'll find me eventually," Luke said, his tone grim. "I've already stayed longer than I should have. I need to figure out my next move." Ashley crossed her arms. "And what's your plan? Run again? Fake another death? Leave me to clean up the mess like last time?" Luke turned to face her, his expression hardening. "I'm trying to protect you, Ashley. You think this is easy for me?" "No," she shot back, her voice rising. "But you don't get to pretend like you're some noble hero. You made these choices, Luke. You dragged me into this." Their argument was cut short by the sound of Ruby's laughter from the kitchen. Ashley immediately lowered her voice, her anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'm not hiding you forever," she said firmly. "Figure out your plan, and then you're gone." Luke nodded reluctantly, his shoulders slumping. That evening, as Ashley tucked Ruby into bed, the little girl looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Mommy, is your friend staying here?" Ruby asked, clutching her stuffed bunny. Ashley hesitated, brushing a strand of hair from Ruby's face. "Just for a little while. Sweetheart, he needs a place to rest." Ruby nodded, satisfied with the answer. "He looks like someone from my picture book," she said sleepily. Ashley's heart clenched. "What do you mean, baby?" Ruby yawned, her eyelids drooping. "The knight, the one who goes away to fight dragons." Ashley kissed her forehead, her throat tightening. "Good night, Ruby." As she left the room, her mind churned with thoughts. To Ruby, Luke was just a passing stranger, a man who reminded her of fairy tales. But for Ashley, he was a storm she couldn't escape, a storm that threatened to tear apart the fragile stability she had built. The next day, Ashley decided to take Ruby to the park, hoping some fresh air would ease her mounting anxiety. She left Luke at the apartment with strict instructions not to leave or answer the door. At the park, Ruby ran ahead to the swings, her laughter echoing through the crisp autumn air. Ashley sat on a bench, her eyes scanning the playground but her thoughts elsewhere. She didn't notice Zachary until he sat down beside her, a cup of coffee in each hand. "Looks like you could use this," he said with a smile, holding out one of the cups. Ashley jumped slightly, startled. "Zachary, what are you doing here?" "Just passing through," he said casually, though his eyes searched her face. "You've been on my mind. You seemed a little stressed the other day." Ashley forced a smile, taking the coffee. "Thanks. It's just life, you know." Zachary nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Anything I can help with?" Ashley hesitated. She wanted to confide in him, to unload the weight of everything she was carrying. But how could she? How could she explain Luke's sudden return? His secrets, his lies. "I'm fine," she said finally, avoiding his gaze. "Just a lot going on." Zachary didn't press her, but his concern was evident. "Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm here." "Thanks," Ashley said softly. When Ashley and Ruby returned home, the apartment was eerily quiet. Luke was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a piece of paper. "What's that?" Ashley asked warily, setting her keys on the counter. "It's a list of safe houses," Luke said, his voice flat. "Places I might be able to stay after I leave here." Ashley folded her arms. "You expect me to believe you have safe houses lined up, that this isn't just another one of your lies?" Luke's jaw tightened. "Believe what you want, Ashley. I'm trying to fix this." "Fix it," she repeated, her voice rising. "You can't fix this, Luke. You can't undo the past." Their argument was interrupted by Ruby, who came running into the room holding a drawing. "Look, Mommy," she said brightly, holding up the picture. It was a crayon drawing of 3 figures: a woman, a little girl, and a man with dark hair. Ashley's breath caught. Ruby had drawn Luke. "What's this, sweetheart?" Ashley asked, forcing a smile. "It's us," Ruby said proudly. "You, me, and the night." Luke glanced at the drawing, his expression softening. "That's nice, Ruby." Ruby beamed and skipped back to her room, leaving Ashley and Luke in tense silence. "She doesn't even know who you are," Ashley said quietly, her voice trembling. "She thinks you're a storybook character." Luke's shoulders sagged. "Maybe that's for the best." Ashley shook her head, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "You don't get to decide what's best, Luke. Not anymore." She turned and walked into her bedroom, closing the door behind her. That night, as Ashley lay awake in bed, her mind raced with thoughts of Zachary, Luke, and the precarious balance she was trying to maintain. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this up. Something had to give. The next morning, Ashley woke to the sound of murmured voices coming from the living room. Her heart immediately raced. She threw on her robe and rushed out, fearing the worst. Luke was seated at the table, talking quietly with Ruby, who was eating cereal and listening intently. Ashley froze in the doorway, her stomach knotting at the sight. "Good morning, Mommy," Ruby chirped, her bright smile lighting up the room. Luke glanced at Ashley, his expression guarded. He looked almost at ease, as if this was the life they were supposed to have, sharing breakfast in a cozy home. Ashley's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Ruby, why don't you finish your breakfast in your room? Take your bowl with you." Ruby frowned but obeyed, carrying her cereal to her room with a pout. The moment the door closed behind her, Ashley turned to Luke, her voice low but furious. "What are you doing? I told you to keep your distance from her." Luke sighed, leaning back in his chair. "She's a curious kid, Ashley. She was asking questions. What was I supposed to do?" "Ignore her!" "Yes," Ashley snapped, keeping her voice hushed. "She doesn't need to get attached to you. She doesn't even know who you really are." Luke's jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that? You think it doesn't kill me to see her and know I can't tell her the truth?" Ashley folded her arms, her anger tempered by frustration. "Then don't make this harder for her. Or for me, just stay out of her way." Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but thought better of it. Instead, he stood and grabbed his jacket. "I'm going out for a walk," I need some air." "Don't be stupid," Ashley said, her tone sharp. "The whole point of hiding is not to be seen." "I'll be careful," Luke muttered, already halfway out the door. Luke's departure left Ashley with a gnawing sense of unease. She tried to distract herself by cleaning the apartment, but her mind kept drifting to the previous day's conversation with Zachary at the park. He had been so kind, so understanding, but the guilt of keeping secrets from him weighed heavily on her. By the time the afternoon rolled around, Ashley couldn't take the silence anymore. She called Zachary, her fingers trembling as she held the phone to her ear. "Hey, Ashley," he answered after the first ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Hi, Zachary," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "Are you free? I was wondering if we could meet for coffee or something." "Of course," he said without hesitation. "Where should I meet you?" Ashley gave him the address of a cafe a few blocks away and hung up, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she knew she couldn't keep everything bottled up. The cafe was small and quiet, with the faint aroma of roasted coffee beans filling the air. Ashley sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug as she waited for Zachary to arrive when he walked in. His presence immediately put her at ease. He smiled as he approached, pulling out the chair across from her. "Hey," he said, his tone light. "You sounded a little off on the phone. Everything okay?" Ashley hesitated, staring down at her coffee. "It's complicated," she admitted. Zachary leaned forward, his expression attentive. "I'm here. Talk to me." She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Do you ever feel like the past just won't let you move on? Like no matter how hard you try, it keeps pulling you back?" Zachary studied her for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I've felt that way. Sometimes the past has a way of haunting us, especially if there are unanswered questions." Ashley bit her lip, her hands tightening around the mug. What if those unanswered questions come with people you thought you'd never see again? Zachary's brow furrowed slightly, but his tone remained calm. "Are you talking about someone specific?" Ashley hesitated, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. She wanted to tell him everything, to unload the burden she'd been carrying, but she couldn't bring herself to say the words. "Forget it," she said finally, forcing a weak smile. "I'm just overthinking things." Zachary didn't look convinced, but he didn't press her. "All right, but if you ever need to talk, I'm here. No judgment." "Thank you," Ashley said softly, her voice thick with emotion. When Ashley returned home later that evening, Luke was pacing the living room, his expression tense. "Where were you?" he demanded. "Out," Ashley replied curtly, setting her bag on the counter. "I needed some space." Luke ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "You can't just disappear without telling me, Ashley. If something happens..." "Don't," she interrupted, her voice cold. "You don't get to lecture me about disappearing." Luke's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he sat down heavily on the couch, rubbing his temples. Ashley sighed, her anger giving way to exhaustion. "Did anyone see you while you were out?" "No," Luke said. "I was careful." "Good," Ashley said, sinking into the chair across from him. "Because the last thing we need is for your problems to become Ruby's problems." Luke looked up at her, his eyes heavy with regret. "I never wanted this, Ashley. I just want to make things right." Ashley's voice softened, but her resolve remained firm. "Then figure out a way to end this, because I can't keep living like this, Luke. Not for you." The apartment felt heavier with each passing day. The once cozy space now seemed suffocating, filled with secrets and tension that threatened to spill over at any moment. Ashley did her best to maintain a sense of normalcy for Ruby, but the cracks in her carefully constructed facade were beginning to show. Luke's presence was a constant reminder of the chaos she was trying to outrun. He spent most of his time in the shadows of the apartment, avoiding the outside world, but his restlessness was palpable. Ashley could feel it in the way he paced the living room, the way his eyes darted toward the window whenever a car passed by. Ashley was folding laundry in the bedroom when a knock at the door jolted her. She froze, her heart racing. "Ashley," Luke called softly from the living room, his voice tinged with concern. She walked to the door, peering through the peephole. Relief flooded her as she recognized the familiar figure standing outside. "Zachary," she muttered under her breath, quickly composing herself before opening the door. "Hey," Zachary said with his usual easy smile. holding a small bouquet of daisies. "I thought these might brighten your day." Ashley managed a weak smile, stepping aside to let him in. "Thanks. You didn't have to." Zachary handed her the flowers, his eyes scanning her face. "You look tired. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just a lot going on," Ashley said, avoiding his gaze. Zachary nodded, though his expression was tinged with doubt. He glanced toward the living room, where Luke was sitting on the couch, his body stiff with tension. "Who's this?" Zachary asked, his tone casual but laced with curiosity. Ashley hesitated for a fraction of a second, the air between them growing thick. "Oh, this is Luke," she said finally. "An old friend. Visiting for a bit." Luke stood and extended a hand, his expression guarded. "Nice to meet you," he said, his voice measured. "Zachary," he replied, shaking Luke's hand firmly. His gaze lingered on Luke, the wheels turning in his mind. Ashley could feel the tension crackling in the air like static electricity. She cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Ruby's in her room if you want to say hi," she said to Zachary. "Of course," Zachary said, his demeanor softening. He smiled and walked toward Ruby's room. Leaving Ashley and Luke alone, the door clicked softly behind him, and Ashley turned to Luke, her voice a sharp whisper. "What was that?" "What was what?" Luke asked, his tone defensive. "The way you looked at him," Ashley hissed. "You're supposed to stay low, not act suspicious." Luke's jaw tightened. "I don't trust him." Ashley crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "You don't get to decide who I trust. Zachary has been there for me and Ruby in ways you never were." Luke's expression darkened, but he said nothing. A few minutes later, Zachary emerged from Ruby's room, holding one of her crayon drawings. "She's got some real talent," he said with a smile. Ashley forced a laugh, the tension still gnawing at her. "Yeah, she loves to draw." Zachary's gaze flickered between Ashley and Luke, the unease in the room not lost on him. "Well, I should probably get going. Just wanted to check in." "Thanks for stopping by," Ashley said, walking him to the door. As Zachary stepped outside, he paused, turning to her. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call. Seriously." Ashley nodded, her throat tight. "I will, thanks." She closed the door and leaned against it, her head spinning. That evening, Luke sat at the kitchen table, his expression brooding. "So, who is he?" Ashley set down the dish towel she was holding, her patience wearing thin. "I told you, he's a friend." "He's more than that," Luke said, his tone accusing. "You don't let just anyone into your life like that." "And why do you care?" Ashley shot back, her voice rising. "You haven't been a part of my life for 5 years. You don't get to judge the people I let in now." Luke's hands curled into fists on the table. "I care because I don't think he's who he says he is." Ashley let out a bitter laugh. "That's rich coming from you." Luke stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm serious, Ashley. Something about him doesn't sit right with me. You need to be careful." "Careful," Ashley said, her voice trembling with anger. "The only danger in my life right now is you. You're the one who brought this chaos back into my home." Luke's face fell, the weight of her words hitting him like a blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of Ruby calling from her room stopped him. Ashley turned and walked away, her heart pounding. She didn't want to hear his excuses anymore. Late that night, Ashley lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Luke's words about Zachary echoed in her mind, mingling with her own doubts and fears. Was Luke right? Could Zachary be hiding something? She shook her head, pushing the thought away. Zachary had been nothing but kind and supportive. He wasn't the one who had lied to her, abandoned her, and turned her life upside down. But as much as she wanted to believe in him, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that nothing in her life was ever as simple as it seemed. The tension in the apartment was unbearable. Every interaction between Ashley and Luke felt like walking a tightrope. Ruby, blissfully unaware, continued to fill the small space with her laughter and chatter. But the storm brewing between the adults was impossible to ignore. Luke had become increasingly restless. His pacing, his glances out the window, and his cryptic mutterings filled Ashley with unease. It was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. Ashley was folding laundry when her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up and saw a message from Zachary. "Can we meet? I need to talk to you." Ashley's heart skipped a beat. Zachary had been her anchor during the chaos, but the lingering suspicion in Luke's words had planted seeds of doubt. Still, she couldn't ignore him. "Sure, the cafe," she replied. "I'll see you there at 3, came his response. By the time Ashley arrived at the cafe, her nerves were frayed. Zachary was already there, seated at their usual table, his expression unusually serious. "Hey," Ashley said cautiously, as she slid into the seat across from him. "Thanks for coming," Zachary said, his voice calm but tinged with an edge she hadn't heard before. "What's going on?" Ashley asked, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. Zachary hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Ashley stiffened. "Okay. Who is Luke?" Zachary asked, his tone direct. Ashley's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the cup as her mind raced. "I told you. He's an old friend." Zachary leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Ashley, I know he's not just an old friend. I did some digging, and his name came up in some very interesting places." Her heart pounded in her chest. "What are you talking about?" Zachary pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Ashley unfolded it with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the text. It was a report, an investigation into Harrison & Co., and its connections to embezzlement and organized crime. Luke's name was there, listed as a suspect. "How did you get this?" Ashley whispered, her voice barely audible. Zachary hesitated before answering. "Because it's my job. I'm a private investigator, Ashley. I've been working this case for months." Ashley felt the ground shift beneath her. You've been investigating him this whole time." "Yes," Zachary admitted, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "But I didn't know he was connected to you until I met him in your apartment. That's when I realized I needed to tell you the truth." Ashley's mind reeled. The man who had been her support, her lifeline during these chaotic weeks, had been hiding the most critical piece of information all along. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. "I didn't lie," Zachary said, his tone earnest. "I just didn't tell you everything. I didn't want to drag you into something dangerous unless I had to." Ashley shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You should have told me from the start. I deserve to know." "I know," Zachary said, his voice soft. "And I'm sorry, but I'm telling you now because I care about you. And Ruby, this isn't just about Luke. It's about keeping you both safe." Ashley wiped at her eyes, her emotions a tangled mess. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Zachary said. "I can bring Luke in. He has information that could take down Harrison & Co. But he's running out of time. They'll find him eventually. And when they do, they won't leave any loose ends." Ashley's stomach churned. She felt trapped, caught between the man she once loved and the man she had started to trust. "I need to think," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Zachary nodded, his expression somber. "Take all the time you need, but don't wait too long." When Ashley returned to the apartment, Luke was waiting for her, his face dark with suspicion. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Out," Ashley said curtly, brushing past him. "With him," Luke pressed, his tone accusing. Ashley turned to face him, her anger boiling over. "What if I was? You don't get to question me, Luke, not after everything you've done." Luke's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to protect you, Ashley. Protect me," she snapped. "By dragging me into your mess, by forcing me to choose between my safety and my sanity." Luke stepped closer, his voice low. "You don't understand what they're capable of. If they find me, they'll come after you and Ruby too." Ashley's voice broke as she replied. "And whose fault is that?" Luke stared at her, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't want this. I just wanted to make things right." "Then do it," Ashley said, her voice trembling with both anger and desperation. "Stop running, stop hiding, face the consequences of what you've done." Luke's expression shifted, a flicker of something like fear crossing his face. "I can't. If I do, they'll kill me." Ashley took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "Maybe it's time you stopped thinking about yourself and started thinking about Ruby. She deserves better than this." Luke didn't respond. He simply turned and walked to the window, staring out into the night. Ashley retreated to her bedroom, her heart heavy. She had a decision to make. one that would change everything. Ashley spent the entire night tossing and turning, the weight of Zachary's revelation pressing down on her like an unbearable burden. Every time she closed her eyes, images of Luke's face and Zachary's words intertwined in a chaotic loop. If they find him, they'll come after you and Ruby too. When the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, Ashley made a decision. She couldn't let Ruby's life be consumed by Luke's mistakes. In the living room, Luke was already awake, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. The tension in his posture was unmistakable, but Ashley didn't care. "We need to talk," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the silence. Luke looked up, his eyes wary. "What's this about?" Ashley crossed her arms. "It's about you, about what you've brought into this house. I can't keep doing this, Luke. You're putting Ruby in danger, and I won't let that happen." Luke's expression hardened. "You think I want this? You think I'm happy hiding out? Looking over my shoulder every second, I'm doing this for you and Ruby." "No," Ashley said, her voice trembling with anger. "You're doing this for yourself. You're running because you're scared, and now you're dragging us down with you." Luke stood abruptly, his frustration spilling over. "You don't understand, Ashley. These people, they don't just let you walk away. If I stop running, we're all dead." Ashley held her ground. "Then maybe it's time you face them instead of hiding like a coward." Luke flinched as if she had slapped him. For a moment he looked like he wanted to argue, but then his shoulders sagged and he turned away. "I'll leave," he said quietly. "I'll figure something out." "Good," Ashley said, though the word felt like ash in her mouth. That afternoon, Ashley called Zachary. Her voice was steady, but the knot in her stomach betrayed her nerves. "Can you come over?" she asked. "Of course," Zachary replied. "I'll be there in 20. When he arrived, Ashley met him at the door, her expression grim. "Luke says he's leaving," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Zachary nodded, his face unreadable. "Do you believe him?" Ashley hesitated. "I don't know, but I need to know that if he does leave, this all ends, that Ruby and I are safe." Zachary's jaw tightened. "I can't make any guarantees, Ashley, but if Luke gives himself up, I can make sure he has protection. He knows things, important things, that could bring Harrison and Co. down. That gives him leverage." Ashley sighed, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. "And if he doesn't?" Zachary's expression darkened. "Then they'll find him eventually. And when they do, they won't just stop at him." Ashley closed her eyes, her chest tightening. She felt like a pawn in a game she didn't even understand. But one thing was clear. She couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. That evening, Luke packed a small bag, his movements slow and deliberate. Ruby was playing in her room, unaware of the tension filling the apartment. As Ashley watched him, a part of her ached for the man she had once loved, the man who had made her laugh, who had promised her forever. But that man was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. "Where will you go?" she asked softly. Luke shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "I'll figure it out. I always do." Ashley hesitated, then stepped closer. "You can't keep running, Luke. It's going to catch up to you eventually." "I don't have a choice," he said, his voice bitter. "Yes, you do," Ashley insisted. "Zachary can help you. He said you have leverage, information they need. If you work with him, you can stop this." Luke turned to face her, his eyes flashing with anger. "You don't understand what you're asking. These people don't play by the rules. If I give them up, they'll find a way to silence me, and anyone connected to me." Ashley's voice broke as she replied. "And what happens when they find you anyway? What happens when they come after Ruby?" Luke's expression faltered, the mention of Ruby striking a nerve. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I can't promise anything," he said finally, "but I'll think about it." Later that night, Ashley sat in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at her phone. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of betraying Luke, even after everything, made her stomach churn. When the clock struck midnight, her resolve hardened. She dialed Zachary's number. "He's leaving tomorrow," she said when he answered. "If you're going to do something, it has to be then." "I'll handle it," Zachary said, his voice steady. "You did the right thing, Ashley." As she hung up, Ashley felt tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to believe Zachary, to trust that she was doing the right thing, but the weight of her choice felt crushing. The next morning, Luke stood by the door with his bag slung over his shoulder. Ruby was still asleep, and the apartment was eerily quiet. "I'll be in touch," he said, avoiding Ashley's gaze. "Good luck," she replied, her voice hollow. As Luke stepped outside, Ashley felt a pang of guilt so sharp it took her breath away, but she stayed rooted in place, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Minutes later, the sound of a car engine starting reached her ears. She peered out the window just in time to see Zachary's car following Luke down the street. The dam inside her broke, and she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. She had done what she had to do, for Ruby, for herself. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss. The apartment felt eerily quiet after Luke's departure. Ashley sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. The weight of her decision hung heavy in the air, and the silence seemed almost accusatory. Ruby's soft voice broke through her thoughts. "Mommy, where did your friend go?" Ashley turned to see her daughter standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed bunny. Her innocent eyes were wide with curiosity. "He had to go, sweetheart," Ashley said gently, forcing a small smile. "But he'll be okay." Ruby nodded slowly, though her expression was tinged with confusion. "Will he come back?" Ashley's throat tightened. "I don't know, baby. Maybe someday." Ruby seemed to accept this, her attention quickly shifting to her toys. Ashley envied her daughter's ability to move on so effortlessly, but Ashley couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her gut, the knowledge that Zachary was out there following Luke. Ready to confront him, filled her with equal parts dread and relief. She trusted Zachary, but she also knew that whatever came next would change everything. The hours passed slowly. Ashley busied herself with chores, trying to distract her mind from the growing sense of unease. She checked her phone repeatedly, half expecting a call from Zachary, but the silence stretched on. It wasn't until late afternoon that her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, her heart racing when she saw Zachary's name on the screen. "Hello?" she answered, her voice tight. "It's done," Zachary said. His tone was calm, but there was a weight to his words that made Ashley's stomach churn. "What happened?" she asked, gripping the phone tightly. "I caught up with him before he could get too far," Zachary explained. "He didn't resist. We talked. And he agreed to cooperate. He's in custody now." Ashley exhaled sharply, a mix of relief and sorrow washing over her. "He agreed." "Yes," Zachary said. "I think he realized this was his only option. He knows what's at stake. For him and for you." Ashley nodded, even though Zachary couldn't see her. "What happens now?" "We'll work with him to build a case against Harrison and Co. He'll have protection, but it won't be easy. He's putting himself in a lot of danger by coming forward." Ashley's chest tightened. As much as she resented Luke for what he had done, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. "Thank you, Zachary," she said softly. Zachary's voice softened. "I did this for you and Ruby. I wanted to make sure you're both safe." Ashley closed her eyes, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Zachary replied. "Just take care of yourself. I'll keep you updated." That evening, Ashley sat on the couch, her mind replaying Zachary's words over and over. Luke was in custody, and for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope that the nightmare might finally be over. But the relief was bittersweet. The man she had once loved was now a shadow of his former self, caught in a web of his own making, and despite everything, a part of her still mourned the life they could have had. As she sat there, Ruby climbed onto the couch beside her, snuggling close. "Are you okay?" "Mommy," Ruby asked, her voice small and concerned. Ashley wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just thinking." Ruby tilted her head. "About the night." Ashley smiled faintly, her heart aching. "Yeah, about the night." Ruby's brow furrowed in thought. "Do you think he'll fight the dragon and come back to the castle?" Ashley kissed the top of Ruby's head, her voice soft. "Maybe, but sometimes the knight has to fight his battles far away from the castle to keep the people he loves safe." Ruby seemed satisfied with this answer, and she soon drifted off to sleep in Ashley's arms. A few days later, Zachary stopped by the apartment. He looked tired, but his smile was warm as always. "How are you holding up?" he asked as Ashley let him in. "I'm managing," she said honestly. "Ruby's doing well. She's resilient. And you?" Zachary pressed gently. Ashley hesitated, then sighed. "It's a lot to process, but I think we'll be okay." Zachary nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Luke gave us some solid leads. It's going to take time, but with his help, we might actually be able to take Harrison and Co. down." "That's good," Ashley said, though her voice was tinged with sadness. "I hope it's worth it." "It will be," Zachary said firmly. "This is the first step toward ending all of this. For good." Ashley offered a small smile. "Thank you, Zachary, for everything." Zachary reached out and gently took her hand. "You don't have to thank me, Ashley. I just want you and Ruby to be safe and happy." For the first time in a long while, Ashley felt a spark of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they could finally leave the past behind and build something new. As the sun set that evening, Ashley stood by the window, watching Ruby play with her toys. The future still felt uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't feel so daunting. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but with Zachary by her side, she felt ready to face them. Whatever came next, she was determined to protect the life she had rebuilt, for herself and for Ruby. The following weeks felt like walking a tightrope. The news of Luke's cooperation with the authorities had given Ashley a fleeting sense of relief, but it came with its own set of complications. Zachary visited often, updating her on the progress of the case against Harrison and Co., but each visit was a reminder that the battle was far from over. One evening, after Ruby had gone to bed, Zachary sat across from Ashley at the kitchen table. His expression was serious, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity. "Luke's testimony has been invaluable," Zachary said, his voice measured, "but it's also made him a target. The people he's testifying against know he's talking, and they're not happy about it." Ashley's stomach twisted. "What does that mean for him?" "He's under protective custody," Zachary explained. "But these people are ruthless. They'll stop at nothing to silence him. And if they suspect you or Ruby know anything, they might try to use that against him." Ashley's hands trembled as she gripped her mug. "So we're still in danger." Zachary reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "I won't let anything happen to you or Ruby, I promise." Ashley nodded, though her heart remained heavy. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of the situation was overwhelming. The next day, Ashley received an unexpected call. It was from Luke. "Ashley." His voice came through the line, strained but steady. "I don't have much time to talk, but I needed to hear your voice." Ashley's breath caught. "Luke, what are you doing? You're not supposed to contact me." "I know," Luke said, his tone softening. "But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I never wanted to drag you into this, and I hate that you and Ruby have to deal with the fallout of my mistakes." Ashley closed her eyes, her emotions swirling. "You're right. You did drag us into this, but at least you're trying to make it right now." "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make it right," Luke admitted, "but I need you to promise me something." "What?" Ashley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me that no matter what happens to me, you'll move on," Luke said. "You'll protect Ruby and give her the life she deserves. Don't let my mistakes define your future." Tears filled Ashley's eyes. "I promise, Luke." The line went silent for a moment before Luke spoke again. "Take care of her, Ashley, and take care of yourself." Before she could respond, the call ended. That night, Ashley sat on the couch staring at her phone. Zachary arrived not long after, sensing her unease as soon as he walked in. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Luke called me," Ashley admitted, her voice trembling. "He said he needed to hear my voice, and he said goodbye." Zachary's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "He shouldn't have called you. It's dangerous. For both of you." "I know," Ashley said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But what if it was the last time? What if something happens to him?" Zachary sighed, his expression softening. "I understand why you're upset, Ashley, but Luke made his choices, and now he's facing the consequences. The best thing you can do is focus on Ruby and yourself." Ashley nodded. Though the ache in her chest remained, over the next few days, Ashley tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. She took Ruby to the park, read her bedtime stories, and kept her distance from the turmoil surrounding Luke's situation. But the peace was short-lived one evening, as Ashley and Ruby sat at the kitchen table coloring. There was a sharp knock at the door. Ashley's heart leapt into her throat. She glanced at Ruby, her voice calm despite her racing pulse. "Stay here, sweetheart." Ashley approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A man she didn't recognize stood on the other side, his suit impeccable but his demeanor menacing. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "We need to talk." Ashley's stomach churned. She stepped back from the door, her mind racing. "Who is it, Mommy?" Ruby called from the table. "No one, baby," Ashley replied, her voice steady. The man knocked again, harder this time. "Miss Miller, I know you're in there. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Ashley's hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed Zachary's number. "Zachary," she whispered urgently when he answered. "There's someone at my door. He says he needs to talk to me." "I'm on my way," Zachary said, his voice sharp. "Don't open the door. Keep Ruby safe." Ashley hung up and turned to Ruby, forcing a smile. "Let's go play a game in the bedroom, okay?" Ruby nodded, oblivious to the danger. Ashley led her into the bedroom and locked the door behind them, her heart pounding as the man outside continued to knock. Minutes felt like hours as Ashley waited for Zachary to arrive. When she finally heard the sound of tires screeching outside, relief flooded her. The knocking stopped abruptly, followed by muffled voices. Ashley stayed in the bedroom with Ruby, her ears straining to catch any sounds from outside. After what felt like an eternity, there was a gentle knock on the bedroom door. "Ashley, it's me," Zachary called. She opened the door cautiously, her breath hitching when she saw the concern etched across his face. "He's gone," Zachary said. "But this isn't over." Ashley nodded, her legs trembling. "What do we do now?" Zachary's expression hardened. "We prepare. They're trying to scare you, but I won't let them get to you or Ruby." As Ashley looked into Zachary's determined eyes, a flicker of hope sparked within her. For the first time, she began to believe that they might make it through this storm together. Ashley woke up the next morning with a knot in her stomach, the events of the previous night still fresh in her mind. Zachary had stayed late, going over safety precautions, and reassuring her that he would keep an eye on the situation. But even his steady presence couldn't erase the dread that lingered. Ruby's laughter drifted from the living room, a stark contrast to the turmoil in Ashley's mind. She found her daughter coloring at the table, humming a cheerful tune. For Ruby, the world was still safe and bright, and Ashley was determined to keep it that way. The sound of a knock at the door froze Ashley in place. She exchanged a glance with Ruby, her heart pounding. "Stay here," Ashley said softly, forcing calm into her voice. She approached the door cautiously. Peering through the peephole, relief washed over her when she saw Zachary standing there. She opened the door quickly, her expression tense. "Good morning," Zachary said, his tone reassuring. "I wanted to check on you and Ruby after last night." Ashley stepped aside to let him in. "Thank you, she's fine. But I'm still on edge." Zachary nodded, his face serious. "That's understandable. These people don't make empty threats, but I have some updates that might help." Ashley gestured for him to sit, her anxiety mounting. "What's going on?" Zachary leaned forward, his expression grim. "Luke was transferred to a secure facility early this morning. He's fully cooperating, and the information he's providing is already proving valuable, but it's also making him a bigger target." Ashley's stomach churned. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we need to stay vigilant," Zachary said. "The people behind Harrison and Co. will try to intimidate anyone they see as a threat, including you. But I have connections. I've already arranged for additional security to keep an eye on the building." Ashley nodded, her hands trembling. "I don't know how we got here, Zachary. I just want Ruby to be safe." "She will be," Zachary said firmly. "I promise you, Ashley. I won't let anything happen to either of you." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ashley did her best to keep things normal for Ruby, taking her to the park and reading her favorite stories. But the tension lingered, a constant undercurrent she couldn't shake. That evening, as she prepared dinner, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We know where he is. You're next if you don't cooperate." Ashley's blood ran cold. She stared at the message, her hands trembling. "Ashley," Zachary's voice startled her. He had stayed for dinner, his protective presence a source of comfort. She turned to him, her face pale. "I just got this." She handed him the phone, and his jaw tightened as he read the message. "Pack a bag," Zachary said, his voice low but firm. "We're leaving." "What?" Ashley asked, her heart racing. "You and Ruby can't stay here, not tonight, it's too risky," Zachary explained. Ashley nodded, her fear outweighing her hesitation. She hurried to pack a bag for herself and Ruby while Zachary called someone on his phone. Speaking in hushed tones, when she returned to the living room with Ruby in tow, Zachary was waiting by the door, his expression serious. "Where are we going?" Ashley asked. "To a safe house," Zachary replied. "It's secure, and no one will know you're there." The drive to the safe house was tense and silent. Ruby had fallen asleep in the back seat, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly in her arms. Ashley watched the dark streets pass by, her mind racing with questions and fears. When they arrived, Zachary led them into a modest but well-fortified house on the outskirts of town. The windows were reinforced, and cameras were mounted at every corner. "This is where you'll stay for now," Zachary said, setting their bags down. "I'll be close by, and there's a team monitoring the property 24/7. Ashley nodded, her gratitude mingled with exhaustion. "Thank you, Zachary. I don't know what we'd do without you." "You don't have to thank me," Zachary said, his voice soft. "I care about you and Ruby. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Ashley met his gaze, her heart swelling with emotion. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for their safety, but for the possibility of a future beyond this nightmare. Later that night, as Ashley tucked Ruby into bed, she sat by her daughter's side, stroking her hair. "Mommy, is everything okay?" Ruby asked, her voice sleepy but concerned. Ashley forced a smile, her heart aching. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. You're safe, and that's all that matters." Ruby nodded, her eyes drifting closed. "I love you, Mommy. I love you too," Ashley whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As she left the room, she found Zachary sitting in the living room, his phone in hand. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening. "She's asleep?" he asked. Ashley nodded, sinking onto the couch beside him. "She doesn't understand what's happening, and I want to keep it that way." "You're doing the right thing," Zachary said. Ashley glanced at him, her voice trembling. "Do you think this will ever end?" "Yes," Zachary said firmly. "It will, but we have to be strong until it does." Ashley leaned back, exhaustion washing over her. She didn't know what the future held, but with Zachary by her side, she felt a little less alone in the fight. The safe house felt secure, but isolating. Days turned into a routine of cautious normalcy for Ruby, while Ashley spent her nights lying awake, replaying every decision that had led them here. Zachary's constant presence was reassuring, but the looming threat of Harrison & Co. made it impossible to truly relax. On a particularly quiet evening, as Ruby played in the next room, Zachary entered the living room with a grim expression. Ashley looked up from the book she was pretending to read, her heart sinking at the sight of his furrowed brow. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the book aside. "We intercepted a message," Zachary began, his tone serious. "Harrison & Co. knows Luke is in custody, and they're mobilizing to eliminate him. If they succeed, it'll be nearly impossible to bring them down." Ashley's stomach twisted. "What does that mean for us?" Zachary hesitated before answering. "It means we need to act now. If Luke is killed, they'll come after anyone they think might know what he told us, including you." Ashley's hands clenched into fists. "So what do we do?" Zachary sat down beside her, his gaze steady. "There's a way to stop them, but it's risky. Luke gave us information on a key figure in Harrison & Co., someone who's orchestrating everything from the shadows. If we can expose them, it'll destabilize the entire operation." Ashley's breath caught. "And you think that'll be enough to stop them?" "It's our best shot," Zachary said. "But we'll need Luke's cooperation, and yours." Ashley frowned, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" Zachary hesitated. "They're watching you, Ashley. They see you as leverage. We can use that to our advantage, lure them into a trap." Ashley's blood ran cold. "You want to use me as bait? It's dangerous," Zachary admitted, his voice low, but with the right precautions. We can keep you and Ruby safe, and it could be the break we need to end this for good." Ashley stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of fear and doubt. And what if it doesn't work? What if they get to me before you can stop them? "They won't," Zachary said firmly. "I won't let that happen." That night, after Ruby had gone to bed, Ashley sat alone in the living room, grappling with the enormity of the decision before her. She thought of Ruby's innocent laughter, the way she clung to her stuffed bunny, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. Ashley's phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Zachary. "I'll be there early tomorrow. We'll talk more about the plan." She stared at the message, her chest tightening. Every instinct screamed at her to protect Ruby, to keep her far away from this mess. But another part of her, the part that had fought tooth and nail to give her daughter a better life, knew that this was the only way to truly be free of the past. Taking a shaky breath, Ashley typed a reply. "Okay." The next morning, Zachary arrived as promised, his demeanor calm but focused. Ruby was busy coloring at the kitchen table, blissfully unaware of the tension between the adults. Ashley and Zachary stepped into the small guest room, closing the door behind them. "Are you sure about this?" Zachary asked, his eyes searching hers. Ashley nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "If this is what it takes to keep Ruby safe, then yes, I'll do it." Zachary placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll be ready. You won't be alone in this." "Just tell me what I need to do," Ashley said, her voice steady despite the fear swirling in her chest. The plan was deceptively simple. Ashley would follow her usual routine, taking Ruby to the park in the afternoon. The location was public enough to draw attention, but controlled enough for Zachary's team to intervene if necessary. Zachary's team would be stationed nearby, monitoring every move. The goal was to lure one of Harrison & Co.'s operatives into approaching Ashley, providing the evidence needed to link them directly to the criminal enterprise. As Ashley got ready that afternoon, she glanced at Ruby, who was excitedly packing her favorite toys into a small bag for their park outing. "Are we going to the swings, Mommy?" Ruby asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Yes, sweetheart," Ashley said, forcing a smile. "The swings sound perfect." Her heart ached as she watched her daughter. Ruby was her entire world, and the thought of putting her even remotely close to danger made Ashley's stomach churn. But this was the only way. The park was bustling with families, the sound of children's laughter filling the air. Ashley guided Ruby to the playground, keeping her movements natural. She could feel Zachary's eyes on her from across the park, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. Ruby ran to the swings, her laughter echoing as Ashley pushed her gently. Ashley scanned the area, her heart pounding as she searched for any sign of trouble. It didn't take long for the first sign to appear. A man in a dark jacket lingered near the edge of the playground, his eyes fixed on Ashley. Her breath caught, but she forced herself to remain calm. She glanced toward Zachary, who gave her a barely perceptible nod. The man approached slowly, his expression neutral, but his posture tense. Ashley's pulse quickened as he stopped a few feet away. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice low and measured. Ashley turned to face him, her heart hammering in her chest. "Who are you?" The man's lips curved into a thin smile. "Let's just say I work for people who have a vested interest in your cooperation." Before Ashley could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps erupted behind the man. Zachary and two others moved swiftly, their guns drawn. "Step away from her," Zachary commanded, his voice cold and authoritative. The man froze, his smile faltering as he raised his hands. Ashley grabbed Ruby, holding her close as chaos unfolded around them. The operation had worked, but the danger wasn't over yet. As Ashley clutched Ruby tightly, she realized just how much she had risked to protect the life they had built. And she wasn't done fighting. The man in the dark jacket was quickly restrained by Zachary's team, his smug expression replaced with a flash of fear as they led him away. Ashley clutched Ruby tightly, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to calm her daughter. "Mommy, what's happening?" Ruby asked, her voice small and trembling. Ashley knelt down, brushing Ruby's hair back from her face. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're safe. These are good people who are here to help us." Ruby nodded hesitantly, her grip on her stuffed bunny tightening. Zachary approached them, his expression softening as he looked at Ruby. "Everything's under control," he said gently. Then, turning to Ashley, his voice grew serious. We got him, and he's already talking. But this might escalate things. They won't take this lightly. Ashley nodded, her resolve hardening. What happens now? We keep moving, Zachary said. The information he's giving us will put us closer to taking down Harrison and Co., but it's going to take time. Until then, I need you and Ruby to stay out of sight. Ashley looked down at Ruby, who was beginning to relax in her arms. Whatever it takes to keep her safe, I'll do it. The next few days were a blur of relocation and strategy. Zachary's team moved Ashley and Ruby to another safe house. This one more remote and heavily fortified. The isolation weighed on Ashley, but she knew it was necessary. One evening, as Ruby slept soundly in the next room, Zachary sat with Ashley in the small living room. We're close, Zachary said, his tone confident. The man we caught gave us enough to go after one of their key operatives. Once we have him, the rest will start to crumble. Ashley sighed, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on her. And Luke, he's holding up, Zachary said. His testimony is solid, and he's cooperating fully, but he's in more danger than ever. The people we're dealing with don't forgive betrayal. Ashley nodded, her heart heavy. Despite everything Luke had done, she didn't want him to die. He was still Ruby's father, and a part of her still held on to the memories of the man she had once loved. The breakthrough came late one night. Zachary burst into the safe house, his face alight with a mixture of urgency and triumph. We got him, he announced. The operative. He confirmed everything Luke told us, and more. Ashley's breath caught. What does that mean? It means we have enough to take down Harrison and Co., Zachary said. The authorities are moving in as we speak. This is the beginning of the end. Relief flooded Ashley's chest, but it was quickly tempered by fear. Does this mean it's over? Not yet, Zachary said, his expression sobering. There's still a chance they'll retaliate, especially against Luke, but this is a major step forward. You and Ruby are safer now than you've been in months. Ashley nodded, her heart lifting slightly. For the first time, the light at the end of the tunnel felt within reach. In the days that followed, news of the operation against Harrison and Co. began to spread. Major arrests were made, and the criminal empire that had loomed over Ashley's life was finally beginning to crumble. One afternoon, Ashley received a call from Zachary. Luke wants to see you, he said. Ashley's stomach twisted. Why? He wanted me to tell you he's sorry, Zachary said, and that he's grateful for everything you've done. For him and for Ruby. Ashley hesitated, then nodded. All right, when? Tomorrow, Zachary said. I'll take you to him. The meeting took place in a secure facility, the walls stark and cold. Luke sat at a table, his hands folded in front of him. He looked thinner, more worn, but his eyes lit up when Ashley entered. Ashley, he said, his voice filled with emotion. She sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Luke. There was a long silence before Luke spoke again. I don't even know where to start. I've made so many mistakes, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed to see you, to thank you. Ashley's throat tightened. Thank me. For not giving up, Luke said. For doing what I couldn't. You kept Ruby safe. You gave her the life I couldn't. Ashley looked down, her emotions swirling. You did the right thing, Luke. You're helping to stop them. That matters. Luke nodded, his expression somber. I'll never stop regretting what I put you through, but knowing you and Ruby are safe. That's enough for me. Ashley met his gaze, her voice soft. Take care of yourself, Luke, for her sake. I will, Luke said, his voice breaking. As Ashley left the facility, Zachary was waiting for her. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his presence grounding her. You okay? He asked. Ashley nodded, a small smile breaking through. I think so. For the first time in a long time, I feel like we can finally move forward. Zachary smiled, his eyes warm. You're stronger than you know, Ashley, and you're not alone in this. Ashley glanced up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a new beginning. That night, as Ashley tucked Ruby into bed, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The past was still there, a shadow that would always linger, but it no longer controlled her. She sat by Ruby's side, brushing her hair gently. Mommy, Ruby murmured sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart. Are we safe now?" Ashley smiled, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, baby. We're safe." Ruby's eyes drifted closed, her breathing evening out. Ashley leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead, a tear slipping down her cheek. For the first time in years, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. And as she stepped out of Ruby's room, she found Zachary waiting for her, his presence a steady reminder that no matter what came next, she wouldn't face it alone.